Start recording. All right, we're on recording. So, hey, this is Round the Table number 6. The topic today is Designing the Divine. And with me today, we've got a couple GMs and designers. So let's talk to GM Drake. How's it going today?
I'm pretty good. Nice dreary Seattle day.
Yep.
I am game master on demand. I make bespoke D&D and other tabletop assets for digital people and their worlds, handouts, OBS, layouts, all sorts of things. And my primary system is the Conra system, which I kind of sell as like a game genie for 5e, where you can tweak and enhance stuff as you want to with either my gods or my inventions my scenarios and settings, and it's just I always find 5e fun to expand upon, and I think it's the perfect system to just build your own little wonderland. And I like sharing mine with everybody else.
Cool. That's awesome. Happy to have you here, Drake. And
Thank you.
first timer on the pod, we've got Jayke. How we doing for you, Jayke?
Pretty good. It's blindingly bright outside here in Georgia.
Yep.
Very hard to see when you walk outside. Uh, I'm a game master 7 years. I write a bunch of D&D homebrew. Right now, working on Intro to the Fragment Realms, coming out January 1st next year. But yeah, that's pretty much all I do.
Awesome. Happy to have you here. Hope we all have a good time. So anyway, oh yeah, and I'm your host, Dread Pirate Syzer. My project is Skies of Fortune, the Sky Pirate RPG, and it's all about uh, being a pirate. Robbing the rich, keeping for yourself, maybe giving to the poor if you feel that way. And we're currently working on party scale and airship scale combat systems. So, oh yeah, here it is. Here's the shirt, Skies of Fortune. All right. So, thank you for listening
Very nice.
today, and I'll just say up front that I'm probably going to be sort of interviewing you guys more than I'm going to be um, talking about my own stuff, because our topic today, Designing the Divine, is about incorporating gods and such into your setting. Putting the divine in there. And Skies of Fortune doesn't really have any gods. It is set in an era that is similar to the Age of Discovery or the great golden age of piracy. And as such, you don't really associate pantheons of gods with that area. You tend to think about the Protestant English or the Catholic French and Spanish. So when we leave the question of whether God exists sort of to the imaginations of the players and the DM, right? There are powerful beings in our setting, like called the Sky Serpents, or the anthropomorphic personification of death, aka the Grim Reaper. All that stuff exists, but those creatures do not care about being worshipped, and even if a cult were to form around them, they wouldn't really care about it. So my idea with that was like I'm a little averse. I'm a little allergic to having uh, gods right where I don't really want them. But I absolutely see use and can see interest in creating the divine for your setting. So usually with these round tables, I come up with kind of a thesis about um, the topic, and I'll read it out to you, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree with it. So in this case, the question is, what is a god in the context of a TTRPG? And I came up with four things I think that you're generally going to have if you have a god or pantheon of gods. So the first one would be power, right? Going to be you're able to the god is able to affect events in miraculous magical ways through direct means or through worshippers, and generally in ways that are bigger than what your typical magic using PC is going to be able to do. Okay, unless they're really high level, I suppose. So second is domain, or control over a specific category of influence, like we have In, say, the Greek pantheon, we've got um, Zeus, who's like the chief god and the thunder god. We've got Hades, the lord of the underworld, Poseidon, the god of the sea, Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, all those things like that. You have it. There's a specific thing that the god does or reigns over. So that's the domain. Third is possession of a home base that may be physical or abstract. Divine HQ, and with our Olympian example, obviously we've got Mount Olympus, where a lot of the gods live. Maybe you've got Hades and Persephone that live in Tartarus, and a few others like that. But there's got to be. They typically have a place. They separate themselves from the mortals usually. Maybe not true in all settings, but it's usually how it goes. And lastly, a set of stories that defines the deity's past exploits or the mythos. So that would be like your creation myths. What did the gods do at the beginning of creation? How are they related to each other? Are they one big family? How did they come to be? Things along those lines. So that's power, domain, divine HQ, and mythos. So am I wrong? Am I right? Did I miss something? What do you think?
No, that's pretty spot on. I would say accurate.
Okay.
You know, like if you bare bones it down to the sugar and spice and everything not nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much the basic gist of it. Because again, thematically, everyone's just one, faceless hero away from being any character, and you add enough ingredients into them. So no, that's pretty much very accurate to, I imagine, the gods.
Gotcha. Jake, what do you think? You can tell me I'm wrong. I won't be mad.
No, I was actually just sitting here trying to see is there anything that is missing from this list? Not really, because everything I could think of would fall into one of the four categories. So I would say, yeah, that's a pretty good breakdown of at least the core elements that makes up Divinity in games.
Okay, cool. And I thought I was gonna, I'm not gonna do a debate me bro on this, but at least I'm glad to see that at least I've got you two guys in agreement with about how that works. So let's talk about your stuff, what you're working on right now. So the question is specifically, does your setting contain the divine? And if so, what does the divine or your pantheon look like? Jake, since you're the new guy, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. I have a lot of worlds and a lot of imaginations to go through. But I'll keep it simple. As most of the time when I write Divinity, as most of the things I write are original, I try not to take from systems. I try to create new ones.
Yeah.
Uh, the ideas I always focus on is there's always one to three pantheons that are either intertwined or disconnected. Because
Hmm.
I think something a lot of Divinity systems don't cover is that, okay, there is this series of gods and then all the minor ones. And it's
Gotcha.
like, it's an oversimplification in some cases where I think it's more interesting to have multiple different pantheons vying for power. And at least in my system, such as Intro to the Fragment Realms, a lot of it's eldritch, a lot of it's kind of the unknown void gods that are covered in the system, or at least in the project. So a lot of them are vying over one another to try to become the most powerful, at least in the context of that setting. And that's typically how I run most divinity structures, because I think that adds a lot of conflict and adds reason why there would be a cult that worships this one and hates all the others.
Yeah.
At least that's my thought process.
That makes sense. So let me ask you this about it. Do you have it set up so that the different pantheons like have a bit of overlap in the domains uh, that they do you know that they control? Like, is there more than one god of death, for instance?
Yeah, that's I would say so. A good I'll kind of break down the simplest way of it. I have two pantheons right now I'm working on for a different unrelated project I can't announce yet. But one of them is a bunch of giant beast animals that created the earth and all that stuff. Then there's what's called the cosmic court, which are all the space gods. The thing is, the Cosmic Court technically is more powerful, but they don't care as much as the
Hmm.
Beast ones. So a lot of the Beast ones are always in the situation of, well, technically, I'm not the only god of the tides, because there's the moon god who controls that. But screw the moon god, I'm gonna do what I want to do, and they can come stop me. So I typically have them overlapping, mostly for narrative reasons, but also I think different connotations of, okay, is it rough waters or is it calm waters, right? Different connotations of the same domain, I think, deserve different, I guess, divinity type figures that kind of rule them in conflict with one another.
Cool. I like that idea. So they're not exactly warring, but they can potentially get in each other's way
Yes.
if they're like that. Yeah, that's an interesting way to go about it. I'm trying to think of that. Were you inspired by anything in particular when you came up with that dynamic?
Uh, Not for this reason, but it's something that definitely influenced the way I write the Divine is the Obsidian Entertainment series, Pillars of Eternity,
Oh,
because
sure, yeah.
their divinity structure is so cool. How it works is very interesting. So I do copy a couple notes from them from time to time, but most of it I've just spent thousands of hours sitting down thinking, okay, how can I make this narratively work? So, but I would say if anything inspired me, that definitely that group, great stuff they made for that game series of games, I guess.
Very cool. I haven't played Pillars of Eternity. I've heard of it in Obsidian, of course, but when it comes to inspiration, we're all inspired by something. So, and as they say, good artists borrow, great artists steal, right? So take the stuff that you like, without too much guilt about it. Anyway, Drake, how about you? What are you working on as far as Divinity these days?
Well, my gods have always been like they were the main foundation of like my first world that expanded into like the solar system. So it's kind of fun and interesting because one of the core aspects to my world building and timeline is that it's very cooperative. Like all of my major campaigns and games that I played with people, I end up allowing the history to be written by the player group. And if I like it enough, and if it happens as often enough, I actually turn it into canon. And so it becomes history of like these actual heroes and all the things they accomplish.
Okay.
And that it began with the gods in the sense of me and my high school friends hanging out and playing our 3.5 characters, and then eventually running out of levels and using the deities and demigods book to become gods.
Mm.
And so our DM, our forever DM, was running us around as demigods, and then we became actual like divine rank gods. And so the mythos started at the table with my friends. We're like, well, what if we just shoot ourselves into space and go find a planet to fuck with? And that's like I literally started sketching the planet wall of the apartment we were playing in. So like and
Yeah.
that picture eventually evolved into the main capital of the solar system that I've developed, Conran. And Conran has 9 major gods, and they are all based at least on the main 9 alignments. That's how
Hmm.
I chord it out, is because it's very it doesn't matter if there's overlap between them, but they need to have different alignments as people to create enough drama and sustainability.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, that
I
makes sense.
like everybody loves the Greek and Roman gods and their drama. That's like literally the core of most of our art. And like what Dragon Ball Z is just the tales of Son Wukong. So it's this the stories of the divine can literally last years if you listen to some of the obscure stories or fun tales. And that's what the 9 did. I have 3 like good gods, 3 neutral-ish gods, and then 3 evil quote unquote gods, and they all have their own realms, like planets by themselves that they rule over with Iron Fist. But when it comes to the capital world, they have to share, and they can't overly, swing their god hammers around and just be abusive. So there's laws and there's rules and there's things that you have to do. And so my gods, of course, they try to manipulate people and their followers, and some of them are different technological advancements. I have a super advanced. My god of death is also the god of space and time.
Okay.
So he's hyper advanced. Like Zerg, Xenomorph, Protoss levels of creepy eldritch advancement. Whereas, the nature goddess, sure, she's super powerful and is life and the elements itself, but she's not going to have supercomputers and death lasers. but you also wouldn't want to fight her outside anytime soon. So it's a big thing, and then they all have drama and espionage with themselves, and so I always, it's kind of fun to see what they're doing, and they become again the foundation in the sense too, because you can gain favor with them in their churches. Some of their churches are very powerful. Some of them aren't as powerful. Some of them have different ideologies and beliefs, and it just comes down to, like I said, the alignments, not just as, oh, they align as this, but also to speak to the characters that are playing. Like, oh, my character is very paternal and protective, and but this one's also very assassiny and killy. So how does that work out? And I love the duality of polytheistic society. Like, you could actually invoke other names if you want to, or like thank the nine, and the fun little colloquials of like old Roman and Greek myths, where it's like people could have little altars to the different gods in their houses. Like they would pick one that they would focus on, but they would still like, oh well, it's Zeus Day, so we're gonna pay homage to Zeus because we don't want him to just destroy us as he does.
Yeah.
And so it's my world and my setting is very God centric in the sense of they made the worlds, so you kind of owe them your life.
Yeah.
And in a fantasy setting, you can't deny that they don't exist. It's
In,
weird.
indeed, indeed. One of my favorite, certainly my favorite D&D setting was Planescape, where you can basically just go and whatever you can go meet the gods if you want to, right? You can just walk out of Sigil to the Outlands, walk to their plane, and if you can get there, you could potentially meet a god. Um,
I mean, they
and
have to talk to you, but
yeah, if they'll talk
Just
to you,
knock on their door.
just knock on
Hey,
their door.
man.
Yeah, it's generally considered a bit, at least in second edition, it was considered to be a very bad idea to mess with the powers, which is as what they were called in general instead of gods. They were just called the powers, and if even good aligned deities are very possible is very possible to get killed if you get wrapped up in their business. So or worse, because your soul can get get taken over by these powerful beings. But there's also in Sigil there are these factions, right, that believe different things. One of them is called the Athar, right? You would think that they're atheists, but you can't, as you said, you can't be an atheist in a fantasy setting, right? So instead of, they don't believe that the gods aren't real. They say the gods are frauds and don't deserve to be worshipped. And that makes a lot of people very, very angry with them.
at least one of them. I mean, at least one of them's a trickster god that doesn't deserve any of this. We all know this.
Yeah. But yeah, and I'm kind of a famous detractor of the alignment system, but I do like how you have it set up with each deity is like represents one of these alignments. That's a better use of the alignment system than I think we often see. And you can potentially have uh, gods like collaborating in the realms of chaos and law that may not normally collaborate too, right? I could see potentially if you could have a CG and a CE god collaborating on something where maybe
Yeah.
the L or the LG and the CG god didn't agree. So I
That's it. And that happens a lot, actually. Yeah, my main uh, I guess they would say like the service department of like all the centralized government, and that's like all main services like public transportation, education, sanitation. All of that goes through lawful evil god and the chaotic good god. Like
okay.
you have the demon queen of society and like darkness and vengeance, who's teamed up with the knowledge elf goddess. So it's this very like kind of a wicked like Glenda and Elf with a situation. They have this
Yeah.
very dark demoness and this very bubbly elf, and they're like, but they bang out their school system. Like, there's no better public school system. There's no better, like, they're ruthlessly efficient, even though these two gods have been caught in an espionage war for the last 3 centuries.
Yeah,
They're working together.
they got to balance each other out. I suppose it's an example of keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right? You if one of them wants to have control of this education system, the other one's like, oh no no, oh no no, let me in on this too. I'm not gonna let you have your way.
Like, I want to review these books before you publish them. What is happening? What is this?
Exactly, exactly. Oh goodness. Flavors of U.S. politics coming back, but we won't talk about that right now. All right. Is there anything in particular that either you would like to add about your pantheon before we move on?
I have an interesting addition.
Go ahead.
So you guys were talking about how you can't be an atheist, right?
Yeah.
Because in fantasy worlds, the gods exist. Not to seem like a hardcore supporter, but something I want to mention is bringing back Pillars of Eternity just for a moment. What's so interesting about theirs, which I commend a lot, is you can be an atheist because the gods aren't gods, but they're the closest thing you can get to them. So in their world, their gods are divinity, but they only have power if people believe in them.
Okay. Yeah.
So if no one believes in them, they don't have power. I just think that's something to throw in here because I that is like the one exception I've seen, and that's a question I've always had playing many different TTRPGs and stuff growing up in many games. How do you make God? How do you be atheist? And I think that's something in that system that is very unique and very interesting.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to throw that in there because that is a way you could implement that if you are looking to do something of that nature that I think is intriguing.
That is true. I mean, the whole idea of I think gods getting their power from believers,
Mhm.
which they can then dole out back to believers, I suppose, is has been used even in D&D. Is like it is
Yeah,
suggested in
100%.
Planescape that is how the gods gain their power, right?
Mhm.
By having those believers. If you don't have any believers, then you're no longer a god, and you cease to be divine, or you just die, or something like that. That's also true in like I've seen like the Sandman comic books. True in those as well. Um,
Or like in American Gods.
American
Like, they have
gods,
those
yeah,
believers.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like how gods have kind of a rough time in the U.S. because they belief is so different here.
Mhm.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman,
It's like at that
obviously. Hmm?
I was I was gonna like at that point though, is it an atheism when it becomes an act of succession to the point where you know it's hurting like a celestial being? Like at that point, like
Oh,
people are
yeah.
atheists here on Earth. We're an atheist, and like if people are atheists, they're atheists because, nah, I don't see Jesus. I don't know about no Jesus. I've never seen a YouTube of Jesus. But like that would be different if you had your phone out and there's like Dionysus over here turning water into wine and doing party tricks and having strange orgies and stuff. That would be a little more. You're like, okay, what is happening?
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
suddenly know that if you just unsubscribe and don't watch Dionysus, that'll make him go away. Then if you just don't like him, then you can do that, and suddenly he goes away. Like
Yeah, I
it's like
definitely
weaponized theism.
think I think the reason I call that atheism is that's what Pathfinder calls atheism.
Oh,
Because
okay.
their atheism is just
Okay.
we do not think they deserve anything.
Which
But
is
they also have other words for them. So
yeah,
that might just be my bias
that's very
in
similar to the
memory.
Interesting.
Planescape Aethar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because is it just belief or is it knowledge too? Like if one statue of them still exists in the world,
Yeah.
can they come back? Like it's that
If
creepy
one
god
person
mythos.
believes in one that doesn't exist, does a new one arise? That's a
Yeah.
question as well.
Yeah.
Or a variant, does
A
does
variant of
Lydia
one, yeah.
come out of Dionysus? Does
They
you
just
know
start splitting off in multiple forms.
Yeah, what happens what happens in D&D or in the planar setting is that the dead gods, like their corpses appear in the astral plane,
Mhm.
and you can like go and visit them and walk on them as much as you can walk in the astral plane. And of course, everything in D&D has an explanation, right? It's a very well trod setting, so all the questions have pretty much have answers at this point. Um, but anyway, I'm getting off track here. All right. You guys have anything else you want to say about what we discussed so far, or about your pantheons? Nope. Okay.
Yeah,
So
go for it.
so let's move on to this. When and we can this so when constructing your TTRPG setting, when or where do you put in your god or gods? Do you start with an act of divine creation and move forward, or do you reverse engineer the pantheon from the setting's concepts?
It's a great question.
Yeah, how did you do it with your current setting?
Oh gosh. Do you want me to start or do you want Drake to start?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, just jump in.
All right,
Jake.
I'll start because I spoke up, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I'm always struggling with. The way I tend to do it as a game master primarily is I start when I create the world, I start with a baseline of these gods exist that I want to have exist, from a game master perspective. From there, what I tend to do is whenever I have a player play in that world, I offer up during creation, if you want to make up a deity, I will add them into the canon.
Okay.
So what ends up happening is I have basically this pantheon which I've imagined, and then it becomes just a hierarchical tree of all the other ones underneath forever and ever and ever. But I've gone from having eight gods I can think of to 97 in
Ah.
the long term because all my players come up with them, which is really helpful. But I find that way at least helpful for me because I know, especially as a player from time to time, when I'm presented with a pantheon and none of them fit what I want for that character fantasy, it's like, well, now I feel kind of weird. But I feel like at least that's the way I do it. I create a base at the beginning and then have players fill out what they want to fill out as I run many, many different campaigns in the settings over many, many years.
Yeah. Well, that's cool that your players get to like add to the setting as you go. Well, I mean, obviously all players are going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But that they specifically get to add things that are going to show up in the stuff that you're going to be marketing.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's cool. Um, so I guess the answer there then would be that your pantheon appears kind of by the needs of your players rather than by either of the things that I suggested. So that's
Yeah, a majority, I would say.
yeah.
I think I still have the basis of I want to cover the land, the sky, the cosmos, but beyond the broad categories, I tend to have like, okay, who covers the ancient wooded forest off in the north of this mountainous region?
Yeah.
Probably just some minor deity a player wants. I think that's it. Also lets them have fun because I know a lot of players who are like, I have this very specific thing I want to do, and I'm like, you do it because that's fun for me. Being able to shove them all in and figure out where everything falls,
Yep.
is something I enjoy doing. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, you got to have fun with it. All right. Okay, so Drake, how about you? Where do you start when with your gods?
I mean, it was pretty top down, like in the sense that again, like I used them as a foundation for so much, and I already knew so much about most of them. Like the mythos was the player characters of my old, like the bones of my best friends that I learned to D&D with, and it was fun growing up because as I became the forever GM and when we were playing in this world, I could actually just like text one of my friends that was like the original god and be like, "Hey, I have a player that's doing something like this. What would happen? Like, what would you like? Would you just pop up and slap him and be like, 'Stop it,' and then teleport away, or I would ask things like that. And then as it became like less of a fun thing and more of a setting and more of a homebrew, I literally just started to Google Earth on the gods and like just zoom in more and more and more. And
Hmm.
then they became, during character creation on Conran, if you want like a lot of bonuses, if you want a lot of things, like that's why I call it like a game genie in a system, is because it's like adding Pathfinder crunchiness via these gods and via the belief system. And in the sense of like, hey, if you buy into them and if you give them like if you do divine quests, if you do things for the church, if you stand up for stuff, if you declare for them, and if they're like their little champion on the planet, you get extra spells, you get new rituals, you get fancy gear, you get all these luxuries of staying in like church inns and having reputation and reward. And, so the gods become their own thing. But then as you zoom in on the gods, like all of the nine gods, each of them have six sects that are inside of them, like rule the churches. Oh, and all those sects do not always see eye to eye. Like, as they do in churches, different parts of clergy fight consistently for political power. So when that happens, things change. And then, to keep my gods fresh and evolving, gods do this thing called a duality, where the gods are meta beings. They gain more powerful because they see through the veils of multiple realities. They see another version of themselves. And when they do a duality, they converge and merge with themselves. And that celestial being grows into a higher level. But once they come back, sometimes they're different. They're not mentally or psyche the same person. They're the same person by name, but their moods can change. It becomes the mother instead of the maiden.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
these you have different phases of the gods too as they grow. So I have put a little more celestial oomph in them, and so it's gods need worshippers, yes, but what do they need them for? And so it becomes a bigger thing to find out what the gods are up to, because one of the biggest story questions of my games always were too to have these amazing gods is what happens do you have this god and suddenly what if modern technology was introduced like a comet fall? What if suddenly the god of death had a nuclear warhead? What if the god of technology found a cell phone? Like, so I have an event where a modern day Earth, like several cities of Earth, fall into Conran. That's one of the main events of my history. And so Earth tech is just suddenly violently thrust into steampunk setting with gods. So their technology starts to explode in certain ways, and people start to talk in different ways. And when you add modern day political science to a medieval political setting, you get a lot of weird questions asked. Like, what are these gods doing with your souls? Like,
Right. Yeah.
what's this evil engine over here? So it becomes a really big story device.
I see what you're saying. So you not only are you asking the questions of what with all this new technology of what happens with this technology, but what happens with these ways of thinking that a medieval society hasn't encountered yet.
Yeah, and then just even because and after that event, I have it all planned out like you do. Like one of the gods dies and gets replaced by a more Earthos-esque persona,
Mm-hmm.
and the Earth god starts bringing in a whole bunch of demigods that are Earth gods. What if you actually start getting like some people that are classic, Herculean deities or Poseidon and just weird ass demigods that just start to pop up because that's what the players want. I don't know. That's part
Yeah.
of the fun too is adding the collaboration while playing with people and then developing it. Because like even though I have the history written, I've only gotten to a certain point in the timeline and not doing it with people. I love adding the people element to see okay now where are the marbles going to fall and how can I make this as interesting and fun as possible.
Yep. That is true. Players can always are the X factor, right? They're the ones that are kind of come up with things that you never thought of. So
Or they can just help a table joke become a powerful entity. Like how many times has a joke in a campaign suddenly become like this weird super structure in a campaign story?
yeah,
Like,
very true. Very true. All right. Well, that's cool. So let's see. I think I'll just answer the question in generally for myself. If I was going to construct a setting that had gods, I think it kind of depends on the concept more than anything else for me. Rather than the god, the fact of the gods themselves, I would have to come up with a concept for a setting I really liked. Then I would probably come up with the gods, um, reverse engineer it, but maybe I will do that someday. Who knows? Skies of Fortune's still a long way off, but we'll well after that there's any number of ways we could go. So anyway, so I think we've sort of touched on this next question a little bit with what you guys have already said, but I'll just jump into it. Your pantheon may be distant. Your pantheon may be distant and unknowable, or uncomfortably present in the lives of mortals. How does the activity level of the pantheon influence the setting? And I think based on what you've told me, it influences a lot with your settings in particular. Would you say that that's probably the case? I mean, especially in your case, Jake, because you have it seems like you have your two pantheons. You've got one that is kind of distant, your cosmic gods, and then your beast gods, which are down very much more down to earth and more willing to interact with mortals and to kind of shake up the world. Is am I getting that right?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, there's specifically this bear god that appears in every campaign at some point just because I like them. So they're pretty consistently around, I would say. It's not hard to find them if you really were looking for them.
Yeah, and they're always going to be there. Do people are there have the has the shape of society changed around these particular gods? Would you say?
Yeah, I would say to some extent a weird comparison I would make is they are similar in tier to what you would imagine kind of a region defining figure almost to be in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, say a giant leviathan in the middle of the ocean. That specific ocean would then be heavily influenced by how that leviathan decides to go about their day. So no one
Okay.
builds cities in like river or I guess ocean kind of structures anywhere near where this giant leviathan's going about in case it just sorry, knocked over your giant oil tankard. But it's the idea that yeah, I would say they are around and in some way mortal kind will seek them out for specific things like fortune tellings or divine intervention or groups that may go and hunt them to see, okay, you know
Hmm.
what, are they really a god? And then their ship gets exploded. But I feel like that having them physically there really makes that a lot more interactive and makes them feel realer.
Yeah, definitely. They're more like I want to say. So here's a question with the question of the divine HQ. Do your cosmic gods have their like Mount Olympus, or do they all live together, or do they kind of spread out?
That's something I haven't thought too much about in their cases. Most of the time, I just think of them as representative of something. So, one that represents the sun, one that represents each of the two moons. But I kind of imagine they're just around doing their own things. They don't really even consider the planet. They're just like, yeah, we have our own things to do in space.
Yeah,
So they're
gotcha.
off doing that, which is where the Fragment Realms becomes a whole thing because that's what they're doing is that stuff. So that's where that book in project comes in. But they're all fighting eldritch beings and stuff that are trying to destroy the universe and all this
Okay,
stuff. So
yeah.
that they're cognizant of their existence in contrast to this planet, but they're off doing their own things that they think's more important.
Yeah.
Love the idea of terrestrial gods versus celestial gods in like the realm of micromanaging because but it makes sense that terrestrial gods would need to micromanage more and to come out a lot more often because like if you played Civ 5 or like next to Stellaris, there's a big management difference in having a quadrant of space next to having
Oh
a
yeah.
planet.
Or
So...
like just one system versus like, okay, I have to know every single town, who lives in each one. Okay, that's where my workers are. Oh, okay,
Yep.
army. All right. Well,
I know I've talked about like how active my pantheon is, but I should mention that like I don't. They usually don't talk directly to players ever. I have the whole dogma situation where if you actually talk to a god, they'll probably just kill you because you can't process what a god is talking about.
Okay.
But they definitely like their church members and like whoever's in charge or like a high-ranking official with for the clergy usually is a mentor or the mouthpiece. I'll do the burning bush in a dream or some sort of fun visual that's on brand, but whimsically different and vague. But I love like, just the ideology of making them involved, but also making it, you do your own actions. They don't involve themselves because they're like, eh. And I grew up with instead of going through the deities and demigods book, when divine ranks rank up, that gives them the ability to kind of like split themselves in perception. So they can have like, if you're a celestial rank 2, you can be in 2 places at once. At 3, you have a third reality. So if they're like super high rank and they're like in their 20s or 30s of divine rankage, they can be at 30 places at once, be dealing with a whole bunch of fires in their little Stellaris gameplay HUD, and they could be doing a whole bunch of things. So it
just like
depends
7
on.
Leviathans,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
all
Well,
one. Yeah.
but doesn't that kind of like eventually, once you zoom out enough in the world building and everything that you start doing, like there has to be a head mother Leviathan, one
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
and how does she talk to her babies? And like do they use wormholes and all this other sort of things? And that's always just like the fun of it too, is like I make them important, but you gotta, I don't just show them. They're like a season 2 teaser. They're not just pop them out at every every little dog and pony show. Like, this is the god, aren't they fun?
Mhm.
Yep.
It's like you said, you go to their house, they're just gonna have someone kill you or kill them, like close the door in your face, which also kills you, or sends you back to start and does not collect $200.
Yep.
But it's their day-to-day lives. They do what they're doing, and they have their own agendas, and it kind of comes down to the followers to be like, oh, believe and go with them, but I do my own things. They let me do stuff, and if I'm doing bad things, they'll probably tell me, or someone will.
Hopefully, maybe that god is testing you or something like that to see if you can interpret their edicts correctly.
Or
Who
it's like
knows?
the whole ideology of like again, like the soul. Like, is that the thing? Is that the little celestial glimmer that keeps all of their little stuff going? Like, why are they after user souls, and why are they after people belief? And again, that's just like one of the big questions behind gods. I just, in general, too. Like, if I knew a real God existed, you'd be like, okay, so like you said, does my belief make you work? What are you
Yeah,
doing with that? Like, I don't know. Hades seems to have a lot going on. He has a whole river of it over here.
he does.
Like, it's just, they put like a big price on it, but then at the same time, technically, wouldn't Hades be the strongest? And they never talk about that.
Yeah.
I love the idea of multiple pantheons, but wow, my brain would explode. I already know too much about the ones that I know.
Oh
Like,
man, it's a
yeah,
nightmare. I
you
would
have
not
such a
recommend.
spreadsheet. Oh my god,
Dude, I
like,
have like an entire 400-page book of just the gods, and it's like, okay, which one represented plant life again? Oh no! I scroll through all the pages. Surely it's in here.
jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have like a 20-something page document on most of the gods, and that's like the full enchilada, all the formatting and everything when it boils down to them, and I'm still missing 3 when it comes down to like being done with the holy text of making their stuff normal. So
Yeah.
it's such a lot of information to like have to get out and to put there. At least when they're like super hyper important and you make them like have to be involved with a lot of things.
And that is I think a challenge of design, right? Like how much information can you impart to the players that they're going to find useful and they're not going to get bogged down in. At least that's the way I think of it. Um, but yeah.
Yeah.
So I I kind of like how your so with it sounds like for you, Drake, your gods are a bit distant and unknowable because they've got the whole thing of like sort of being too powerful to even be perceived, right? But still, they are very present in the lives of everyone around. Like I don't think a day goes by, maybe in one of your worlds, where someone doesn't notice what the gods have been up to. Would that be about right?
Or at least of their presence.
Yeah.
There's always some sort of ritual or miracle or thing that just seems to happen every day.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad
But
we.
again, it's not.
Go ahead. Go
They
ahead.
don't like show. They don't like show up and do like press releases and major addresses and things. But
They go on
usually it's like,
campaigns.
yeah, no, it's just the churches
Please
usually
worship
again.
me.
Yeah, it's well, I'm like in a pre because they're very like they're pre-industrial right now is like my main like developmental system like Steam, Clockwork, Magitech, Necrotech. These are developmenting technologies for just all of the churches. They all have their own little specialities that they deal in, so all of their followers are becoming used to a certain way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've uh, I have 36-hour days in my world.
Oh, that's
So,
nice.
Mm.
I
so when
was
you have right when you have like two like just giant chunks of time like that, you have time to work and then leisure and they expect things. And so the gods are getting a little, you know, they're getting progressive. Things are changing. People want
okay.
more. And then they don't want to spend their spell slots when they get it. So I've got like I've got mechanical innovation taking the place of like what people used to do with magic.
Mm.
Domesticated gelatinous cubes that clean your house like Roombas.
Yeah.
Or just there's you would have like certain fantasy things after a while that would just kind of domesticated or domestic-ish. And so that's also just part of the fun in being a campy like tabletop setting is like you got these little fun jabs of modern day realism. But the gods deal with all of that just because again they're dealing with their own things and their own stuff. But it's complicated.
Yeah.
Like they let the miracles happen in their names and stuff, but as funny as it is to say now, when it comes to most of their day-to-day operations as gods, they don't really care. I guess because, like I said, they're all doing their own shit. Like I said, they don't always come to the door. If they do, is that one of the knowledgeable presences, or is that just them wasting like your own time? Is it an illusion, or
It's an
because
astral
again,
projection of them
yeah,
from
like
somewhere else.
they're
Yeah.
not opening the door themselves. Like, they're not gonna let you into their house and be like, "Oh, hey, yeah, I've heard about you." I mean, eventually, after maybe seasons of gameplay and hundreds of hours of sessions, sure, you can have a sit down with your guy. But they do things, and the churches do things consistently. But it's again mainly the belief system. But then you run storylines and you have campaigns where, well, what happens if a god dies? What does that do to the belief in everybody else? If a god can die, can all of them die? Would I be more self-resistant, like to the gods, if they can just die at any time?
Mm.
Like, what do you do in that scenario? Like, if you're the opposite of an atheist and you're a devout worshiper, and like your god actually just gets killed by another god. How much of like dirty mortals killed your god? Could you imagine? Some like other hate group of people came and killed your god. Like, what
That
would that do to political? Like,
that would completely upend your setting in a lot of ways, because it's like
it would
now
make a couple of cities crash. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Not only would it the physical implications, but the implications of if the gods are this vulnerable, maybe we can subsume them or something, or maybe the people that we don't like, if we kill their god, maybe they will. Maybe we can wipe them out too. It's a lot of crazy shit going down
Yeah.
there.
And I have a lot, like I have some of those storylines plotted out. I just, haven't connected all the dots yet. But like I have timelines where it's like, okay, this god dies. This god goes crazy for a period of time and just isn't reachable. What does
Yeah.
that mean? Like what all your paladins and clerics and priests do then when, oh, sorry, we're busy right now. Please leave a message after the tone.
Nope, we can't perform miracles. Your church may go bankrupt from the lack of donations or
All
something
the
like
clerics are
this.
just like, no, my power.
Yeah.
No.
Oh man.
The ultimate storytelling device.
Yeah. Well, this next question is a little bit more speculative, so we'll just read it out to you. Our polytheist pantheons, like the ones we've been talking about, do you think they're better suited to fantasy settings? And if you were to try and incorporate one into a non-fantasy setting, how would that affect the pantheon or affect the setting itself? So we'll start with, do you think, yes or no, do you buy that polytheist pantheons are better off in fantasy settings?
I would argue no.
No. Okay.
Yeah, I would say like it's unfortunate, yes, but I would want to say no, just because it's kind of it's
Potentially creatively
it's a
limiting.
it's a sociological problem.
Right.
Yeah,
It's just like,
totally.
especially us as Americans too. I think we can safely say that no, there's only one God. But, like you don't actively say that or want to say that. You just instinctually say that because of the gross religions that are around us in our modern day.
Sure.
So, like, no, I would love in a modern day real setting to say and believe that because I read David Gerard. He wrote the Trouble with Tribbles Star
Mm.
Trek episode, and he's a great sci-fi writer, and he has a couple of great series out. And in one of his series, there was this really great speech about how money isn't actually money, and how like digital money is not really just ones and zeros. It's like, oh, those are chocolate dollars with Nestle, and this is air dollars with this company, and water dollars with that company. So, like that's where we're at with the capitalism and with a modern day any kind of society setting. It's like, no, you can make like even Fallout, when you ultimately look at it, it has different gods because you have Vault-Tec and you have Nuka Cola and you have pantheons in a modern setting or just corporations.
Oh, that's
So
an interesting take. Um,
like that's the gross part that you really like you zoom like don't want to zoom out of that like through the modern day lens, but like we say it's not as set, but like literally Cyberpunk just replaces gods with the corpse and it just fits thematically because that's really the power that we start struggling against is really money as opposed to faith. And
I can
but yes and no.
I can see, yes and no. I can see what you're saying, but I think we can agree that gods in the way that we've laid them out already, that wouldn't be quite the same thing. It's like as you say, there's a thematic through line, but not like a literal through line to get
Yeah.
from point A to point B there.
I mean,
Um,
like I don't think it's certainly a problem. I think that modern storylines and sci-fi storylines will happily lap up a polytheistic. Like just look at Stargate.
oh
Like
yeah,
we started with
yeah.
an Egyptian pantheon, then we went to the Norse pantheon, then we went to like
Hmm.
vampires in space, and then the ancients, and like so. No, I think it depends on your storytelling.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, can you think of like, I guess Stargate is kind of a modern setting, but don't they kind of demystify the idea of gods more or less?
Because they
Um,
boil them down into being like corporations and evil cabals.
I suppose that's true. Yeah.
Because I mean, the Goa'uld were just special yerks that were cosplaying as Egyptians, and like, the Asgards were just fancy greys that were cosplaying as white
Oh,
people.
they were, weren't they? I remember that now. Yeah, I didn't watch much Stargate or SG One or what any of the spinoffs, but I did learn a little bit of that stuff about him.
Then at the
Um,
same time, I don't know. You could look at the fandom not liking it by looking at Star Wars right now. You know, they're trying to stretch out the Force and like with the acolyte and trying to show that there are other sects of the dark side other than just Sith. And the fandom apparently didn't like it. I loved it. I thought the mythos of the acolyte with Force switches and having the ideology of different kinds of dark side beliefs are great. And the same thing with light side beliefs. I would love that in the Star Wars setting, but apparently some of the fans aren't like a fan.
well, I don't know if
So I don't
that is
know.
the reason why they weren't fans.
It's true. I like. I, you grow up watching Claudia Black do enough like intimidating like stuff on screen. Like you're fine with strong female women in sci-fi. I don't understand what these guys are afraid of. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I didn't finish the Acolyte, but I did like what I saw. I think I got about halfway through.
it's
Um,
good.
yeah, yeah, and I didn't really understand if. Yeah, I'm not gonna. Let's not get into the whole. But that's a whole rat's nest of problems right there. Let's not get into that right now.
Oh, well, I hate well again because I think well you know the yes or no to the polytheistic or to a monotheistic in a today's lens is that we're so used to just having a binary system. We're always used to having a yes or a no, a one or a two.
Hmm.
So I think that's like the bigger problem of having like is why a polytheistic society isn't as popular in a modern setting. It's because like in like if you put yourself in a modern mindset or a setting, it's not that hard. You're used to it. You know, that's just our default settings. Either you know you're a believer or you're not.
Thinking of, I never read Percy Jackson. Did either of you indulge?
Oh, too long
Yeah,
ago. I don't remember hardly anything about it.
it's
Yeah.
been a couple of years, but yeah, I read
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I mean, that's modern setting, but with the Olympians, right?
It is, but
Yeah.
the funniest, weirdest part of that is when it comes to his canon world and his actual universe. Is while Percy Jackson is doing this thing, there's another storyline of his cousin who is the daughter of Jupiter, not Zeus. And he is the
Oh,
Roman perception of her.
Mhm.
And
okay.
so the Roman gods are also running around with their own little divine rank one personalities doing things while the Greek like level ones are running around doing their own things while also the Asgardians are running around doing their things. He has an Egyptian series. The Egyptians are also running around doing their stuff in the Kane series. He
Oh
has a
man.
whole world of like all of the pantheons living through the modern day, which I also find really interesting. And it kind of seems like they're touching on it in the new show. And like, I don't care that it's YA. I'll watch this.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of good YA fantasy out there. In fact, I would argue that maybe YA is kind of the, well, at least when I was a librarian, it was the way to go if you wanted fantasy, right?
Yeah.
More than the adult fantasy authors. Um, okay. Sorry, Jake. I feel like we passed you by a little bit there. Was there anything that you wanted to
Oh, I'm
add
just
to?
listening. This is a great conversation.
Okay, cool, cool. Um, but yeah, I can't think of a modern setting where we have uh, gods in the same way that we would have them in D&D. You know.
Hmm.
I haven't watched that new Chaos show on Netflix, but apparently that was really good. A lot of people acclaimed it because that's the whole premise of it. Is like Jeff Goldblum is Zeus, and it's a modern day Earth. So
Okay.
the Olympians are real.
What
Like
was
we know that they exist.
okay? So wait, what's the name of that show?
Chaos with a K.
Chaos. Okay,
It's on
gotcha.
Netflix, but they already canceled it. So it's like, damn it, now I don't want to even get involved because you're not going to give me a season two of this. If I love it,
Yeah.
like, but it, like the idea, like I loved the idea of like, oh, modern day like, Greek gods, like, just could you imagine with social media and stuff?
Oh yeah. Actually, there's a comic book series called The Wicked and the Divine, where every like like 80 years or something, a group of gods comes back, and it's a different set of gods each time, and they're from all different pantheons, and they all become like pop stars and like movers and shakers in society. Um, interesting series. I wasn't. It didn't really grab me as much as other. I think it's by Kieran Gillen. Is that right? Could be right. Anyway, there's those are some ideas. Anyway, but yeah.
I do also would chime in. This is not exactly the topic, but in a way it relates. Is whenever you do see a polytheistic kind of representation of gods or equivalent, it's always in a very different framing for modern kind of settings. A weird example, which is, I would argue, polytheistic because you have the makers in the world, is The Good Place, the TV show.
Oh, that's true.
Because
Yeah.
there are the makers who are a polytheistic set of gods. We just don't know who the heck they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they exist in a modern setting. But that's also, it's taking it in a very unique direction. So I'm not sure if that would be representative of how a lot of people frame polytheistic pantheons in their mind. But there is ways to do it. I think what you always need, very similar to kind of the cyber. What's the word? Why have I lost
Cyberpunk?
it? Cyberpunk aesthetic kind of idea is I think you just need to reframe it in a way that isn't fantasy-esque. You have to take some sort of new direction with it.
Okay.
Because there are plenty of books, I can't recall many, but there are plenty of books out there with sci-fi settings with gods. They just completely reframe how those gods are seen, not necessarily that they're just not gods, or that they're not the same divinity we would apply to fantasy polytheistic kind of pantheons. It's just kind of a slightly different interpretation of them, is how I would think about it.
Yeah, and you could certainly argue that 40K does that, right? You've got the chaos gods, and I guess the emperor may be some kind of divine being. We're not really sure about that, though.
I would say that the DC verse does a decent job too. Like thinking about it, just in the sense too, because I mean, on top of just like the DC heroes, but like you also have Darkseid, and like his actual pantheon of like just evil that comes with him. But then there's also the new gods even that he consistently fights, which is like the old father and all of that. And like not Earth is like a whole bunch of people don't really know about them, so I don't know if it really counts. But then at the same time, you got Diana flying around, who's typically related to like either Zeus or Ares or somebody.
Depending on where the DC canon is at the time, right?
Yeah.
You know what's so interesting about that is actually, you know what it might be is that the further you get out technologically and the further ahead you go, kind of what we were talking about before, the gods become more distant as gods because most of the time either you don't know who they are or they're abstract representations of it or something of that nature. Because you could even go back to the Marvel universe and point at something like the Celestials, or Loki, Thor, and all the people up on Asgard and stuff like that do pseudo exist, but they are just framed in a very, very different way, or just people don't know of them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that weird in between that you find with modern and futuristic settings.
I don't know if we want to look at the Marvel Universe as that example, though, because the Marvel Universe that does, in fact, accept all the shit that happened to it is traumatic stress stricken.
Oh,
And, after the blip, they all have, support groups, and they all have horrible PTSD, and all the major cities have been destroyed one way or another. And, they're all rebuilding. They're all just very sad, confused, time slipped.
Maybe we'll get past that by the time we get to Phase 7. But I'm
Phase 13 in 5 years. I'll see you guys there.
Yeah.
That Earth is a very sad Earth, and that's what they got by accepting a polytheistic religion.
Too much meddling.
Too much meddling. Little too much of
wibbly wobbly.
A little too much celestial whimsy going on there. No.
Very sad Earth. I would not want to live on that Earth.
That is true. Would you be one of the blipped ones or one of the ones who survived the blip?
Even if you survived, you came back.
You came
So
back, but you
like,
were 7 years young. Like you didn't age while everyone else aged 7 years, right?
yeah, and you
Yeah.
didn't remember. Like, you still come back to like a Earth that's way different.
I will never
And
remember. I will never forget that scene where all the band kids appear in the middle of that
Yeah, I was just
gym
thinking
room.
about that. Just thinking
That
about
like
that.
what was like Far From Home or not? I don't even remember what movie that was a part of.
It was one of the
But it's one
Spider-Man
of the
ones.
Spider-Mans, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that scene, you're like, whoa, hold up a second. But yeah,
God,
definitely.
like I don't even think it would be worse to, I guess, be both. I don't know. Like, would you have rather have been in a coma for COVID, or would you rather just have, you know,
I think we'd
like,
have a pretty high percentage of people wanting just to not be there. You know, just don't put me
Yeah.
there,
I guess,
man. I'll take the 7 years.
All right. Okay, let's get back on track though.
Yeah.
I got one
that's the point.
I got one more question for what we can talk about here real quick, and I think we've gone over it a little bit too, but I think if you're going to have very activist pantheons in your world, there's going to be player options that come out of that, right? So what are the what how does the presence of gods in your setting affect player options like classes, like species, like I don't know, feats, whatever you would might call them in your setting?
Whereas Jake is like, you can just, yeah, give me a god if you don't know one. Like, I'm that way with
Yeah.
species. I will gladly any player on Conrad. I'm like, I don't care what you want to be. Like, I got like little hedgehog people in there. I've got, you know, I had
Yeah.
Aarakocra stats before there were Aarakocra stats, and I have the I have the Sahilians, which is like, Ursula from the Little Mermaid, like octopus centaurs, because why doesn't wizards have those stats? I'm sorry, like, the
Hmm.
best like mer person's body. Like, yeah, I want tentacles, screw fins. No, thank you.
Turn me
And so,
into Eldritch God, thank you.
Yeah.
yeah, no, exactly. But it's like, so when it comes to species, yeah, I just be like, okay, just go at it. Tell me what you want to
Yep.
do, and like that'll kind of help you with your god. And so it's usually just kind of a fun little randomization sheet.
Okay, cool. Yeah, how about you? How about you, Jake, and for your setting?
You've given me an excuse to talk about warlocks, which are the greatest thing D&D has ever made.
And you have a
I
lot of gods.
I,
Yeah,
I do like
Oh
hard
man,
warlocks.
pass.
I love warlocks, dude. I have a problem. No, but yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I definitely agree. Like character species and races and stuff definitely are influenced by divinity because I feel like they kind of shaped them a little bit, like they came to being through them, at least in my mental head canon. But definitely when it comes to like classes, and I think of clerics and warlocks from Dungeons and Dragons specifically, because I really like having that direct connection where a character can link to one in some way, shape, or form, and it lets you explore them in a lot more of an interesting aspect. So, to give an example, my god of death, who is kind of outside of the reign of all these pantheons and kind of his own thing, he will just, oh, if you're dying, man, that sucks. You know, you could die, or let's make a deal. I'll send you back if you do something for me. Suddenly they're a warlock,
Hmm.
in some cases. And that's so, so fun for me because it's like I get to be that little thing whispering in the player's ear, like, you see that guy over there? You should go stab him when he's not looking. Trust me, it'll work out. But yeah, I think divinity, at least if I had to add a fifth point to the list we kind of started with at the beginning, is they should impact the species and the classes to some extent because I think that makes them, again, back to the idea of they're so real. They're there, you can feel the influence of them, even if it's not the direct "I am your patron" style, but more of this type of worship came to form and made this entire offspring or like tendering off of cleric
Hmm.
cloisters and this group of warlocks who become cultists and stuff like that. And I think it adds a lot to those systems because it's not no longer just I take great old one. I don't know who that is, but I'm great old one now, which is pretty common I run into, especially in D&D. So I feel like blending them in is part of the fun of having a divinity system is seeing how they influence the mechanical functions along with the world building of species and classes and stuff.
Absolutely. You know, if they're gonna have worship, if they're gonna be the kind of god that has worshippers, why not gain a little bit of oomph back for that, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's like I end up using that because I have the nine major ones, and I know so much about them. So that gives me a lot as a designer. And like you said, you borrow and steal as you please. You go back through old Dragon magazines, and you go back through old books that they haven't redone yet, and you go back through things, and you find old subclasses that are cool as hell. And like okay, let's how can we rework meta magic back into fifth edition, like as a
Yeah.
Mm.
thing? So I end up doing that, and that's what like I can do that with the excuse of giving it my own history with one of my own gods and being like, yeah, dirge singers. There was a really sad vampire who was a great singer, but then they died, so they had to learn how to sing to other vampires. And or it's just so you get the fun of giving people that extra flavor too, though, and like that's kind of the point when if you have a really involved pantheon, you have to let the people interact with them at such a level that how it makes their character feel good, like with the subclasses. And I love
Yeah.
warlocks, but I also love druids and I love
Oh
bards.
yes,
Like
yes.
bards consistently love attention, and like who's more narcissistic than a god? So bards and gods really do work together if you do it right.
Yep.
And the same thing with druids, like circles of all sorts of fun. Like I'm working on an urban druid update
Oh yeah.
because they were in a Dragon magazine, and I love the idea of my creepy death time space god having like a druid circle that's a metropolis. Like he lives in the city. Like cities are beautiful microorganisms of death and and like innovation. So of course a gross like death druid would be drawn to this. And people don't give druids those options.
Yeah, and
You got to give them flair.
I know that at least in third edition they had vermin sanctioned off from regular
Mm.
animals, and like I don't think you could necessarily control them as well if you were a druid. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but
The vermin lord now.
yeah,
That's
there we go. And you could certainly have a lot of fun with a druid that could that was like Willard who could just control rats at will.
yeah.
No, here's a
I like some
question.
of
Go ahead, go ahead.
or like just some of the fun features were like instead of like talk to tree or talk to stuff, you could actually like talk to house fronts and
Mm-hmm.
storefronts, and like it would look like an old like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where like the windows became the eyes and the shutters became the eyelids and the door was a mouth, and you're
Yeah,
just sitting here talking to a house, being like, okay, which way do they go? And,
yeah,
like it's whimsical and strange as hell, but like if you kind of just upgrade the visionary into that strange Doctor Strange visual of asymmetrical windows suddenly becoming infinity portals and looking like little kaleidoscope trippy like
yeah,
window portals. It's just a small twist and a little reflavor.
yeah. I like that. And it's like the idea of sort of like the ancestral memory of a place. Um, instead of
What is that?
yeah, I'm
The
into it.
thought. It's a psychiopathy, right? Of like the items having memories.
Oh, psychometry.
Psychometry, yeah. That's always a
Yeah,
cool like underrated ability. I love that with the Star Wars game with Cal. And like
yeah.
a whole idea that
Mm.
that was his force ability that he could like read the histories of things.
Yep, and it works in sort of like the way that you have uh you know diary entries or logs that you would find in BioShock or something like that. So,
Yeah.
and it
Or
adds to the
again,
mythos too. So,
there's a fun warlock class or a druid circle for a time god right there. Is that you could get like readings off of things and seeing personal histories.
yeah. So, okay, one more quick question before we wrap up. This was just something that was on my mind while I was writing questions and while we were talking today because it came up a few times kind of unremarked. Eldritch beings, like say the Lovecraft outer gods, they're called gods, but do we see them as gods in the same way that we would see like the Greek pantheon as gods? Does a pantheon does a god have to be in some way knowable or um, like even benevolent for it to be a god, or is it okay to just have um, like this these super predators, these cosmic super predators, and call them gods?
I think when it comes to like just as a thematic storytelling for myself, I use them as like the boogeyman of things that are like the dragons beyond the map.
Yeah.
Because I actually have that, like my all-seeing god can't see past a certain date in the future. He's told everybody this.
Okay.
And so everybody knows that at a certain point in the future something's going to happen and that it involves like the breach of space from their solar system.
Mm.
And so I get it's like, I always just keep the true eldritch, quote unquote, like the unknown things. I just kind of keep it under your hat. Like that'll go over there in that inky dark pile. I'll just pull from that later whenever I need to.
Yeah.
We can just go there for now. But I actually like when it comes to like them historically and whatnot. I don't know. That's a good question because I think they've carved out their own like the eldritch Lovecraftian iconography of Cthulhu and that mythos. That's definitely its own established pantheon now. I would say they're gods in and of
Okay.
their own right.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's something I play a lot with because I think Eldritch beings are awesome.
Sure.
Yeah,
I just
I would
love
think.
horror, man.
Yeah.
But the way I guess I look at it is, I almost imagine this is where I get into things like different realms of reality and realities and stuff, and planes and stuff, because I look at it as if they are trapped somewhere and they're trying to get out to influence more things.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
almost like they are a scourge of things that are trying to take over stuff. I think of like kind of going back to when Jake mentioned Stellaris. I think of it like the endgame crisis. It's here to kill everything to some extent, or like the Reapers from Mass Effect, or something of that nature. Where
Yeah.
I think people could definitely see them as gods, and I think that's definitely a way to take them. I see them much more almost like a cosmic force of nature, you
Mm.
know? But I do think those are not mutually exclusive things. I think there could be one god that's an eldritch that pushes all this, like a swarm. But I always imagine, in simplest terms, there is a group of them just one step away from you guys, and the only things holding them away are either the gods that are here or some other interplanar unknown force that is kind of keeping them at bay. Which is why you only see figments of them with small cultist groups all over the place and stuff like
Yeah.
that, because I think that leads into like it is almost the unknowable pantheon in a way. Like you can't know who they are because no one knows who they are except this one dude who read this forbidden text 5,000 years ago. Who knows?
Yep.
Um, and in that way, I see them like a mystique set of gods, almost in a way, is how someone could frame them. And I think that's how at least I look at them. I would consider them gods in that way.
Okay. So,
And I want to debunk them and be like, let's just make it so that all the quote unquote eldritch terrors are just giant space whales that are terrifying looking, are just friendly enough.
Giant,
Just fly by.
scary space whales.
Yeah, it's just we'll just Star Wars it. Oh yeah, the things that kill the spaceships. Nope, they're just confused animals that
They're
we've
just
just never
giant
talked
animals, man.
to.
I have no idea where we found them. I don't.
Yep,
yeah.
it's like Stellaris. Oh no, it's a giant space
The group of
squid.
Tiyanki whales. Uh-oh.
You got to
There
deal
goes
with
all
it.
of my military.
If you know how to talk to them, you're completely good. If you don't, they will kill everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, folks. I think that's an episode. So anyway, thank you both, GM Drake and Jake, with Fragment Realms for coming here today to talk about designing Divinity. There's a thesis to be drawn. I don't know what it is, but I do know that I had a good time talking with both of you.
That's the viewers. They can figure it out.
They can figure it out.
That's
Yeah.
their job.
All right.
If not, the gods made us do it.
Yeah,
So.
the gods made us do it, folks. Don't blame us.
We're puppets. Help.
Yep.
So
We're in danger.
before we go, where can people find you? We'll start with Drake.
GM Drake, or GM on Demand on Twitter and Blue Sky.
Okay, cool. And Jake.
Jake Paver, Paver, Jake with a Y. Trust me, it makes sense eventually on Twitter or Blue Sky, either of those.
Okay, and you can find Skies of Fortune. That's my game on. It's just Skies of Fortune on Twitter and Blue Sky. Thank you both, and we will see you for the next one. Bye.